This was a meetup event within Latchana on closing the entrepreneurial gap.
That I've had and that others have had in large organizations, and particularly incumbent organizations, but this is not specifically for organizations which have been around for many, many decades. These are challenges and opportunities that many organizations can have. Perhaps organizations are startups, but they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there are natural structures and expectations which emerge, which we should all be conscious of as the organization develops. So before, by the way, these slides are available if you hit that URL down there. I'm going to be presenting that URL again at the end. So if you don't get it entirely now, then you'll get another chance later. As Iwana says, I'm a business agility coach consultant. I've been fortunate enough to work for and support a number of different organizations over the years. Spent a lot of time in the newspaper industry and the broadcast industry, working for different retailers and some consultancies, as well as also working for the UK government as well. So this talk is going to be a collection of experiences and also the knowledge that I've acquired from other thought leaders in this space. What I also do is I have created a non-profit organization called the Agilist, and the mission of the Agilist is to help individuals and organizations sense and respond to a rapidly changing world. So this is looking at supporting teams and organizations and individuals in the lean agile space, but increasingly so, we're exploring directions and opportunities beyond lean agile as well. It's available in the post, it's print only intentionally. It's available at different kind of meetups. When the lockdown's over, it's available at different meetups and conferences, but also you can subscribe to it as well. It's out every month and you can hit that URL to learn more. So let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this evening. And what I thought I'd do is just open up with this cartoon which Verpi's created. Verpi does some fantastic work. I'm going to be referencing her work at the end of the presentation. But what I thought I'd do, I'll just pause on this slide here and give us some moments to reflect on what this means. So it says, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And this is something that Jack Welch said when he was CEO of General Electric. A couple of days ago, he as a CEO, he helped turn around this organization. So it says, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Feel free to unmute yourself or say something in the chat. How do you interpret this? Has anyone got some ideas that I'd like to share? If you're welcome to unmute yourself.
I guess what this saying is trying to say is when the equilibrium of change is not balanced anymore, then we've got into a break point where nothing's really going to happen. So you got to keep on. So in interim, you just have to keep on innovating, keep on making those changes rather than changes never stopping. You never stop. You don't think you got into the ultimate of your business and think that's it. Things are not going to change anymore. The dynamics of change is really, really important. So it keeps changing. That's guess what it's saying.
Yes, thank you. I agree. Yeah. It's. I guess it looks at two variables. One is the internal ability to change, and one is the natural environmental competitive rate of change. And if the external competitive rate of change is greater than the internal capability, then, as Jack Welch says, the end is near. And what we are witnessing with emergent unknown black swan events and the natural disruptive market we're in, the clock cycle of change is getting faster and faster. There are new business models which are competing against business models which were successful in the past, have some relevance today, but perhaps less relevance tomorrow. So you're quite right. I think we need to continuously innovate and continuously develop and test and learn products and services which we can offer our stakeholders and our customers to see whether we are offering something of value. So let's move on. So how can organizations create the ability to rapidly respond to that change that we're talking about? So before we dive into that, I thought I'd talk about some of the pressures which organizations are in. So I put this into 3 pillars. The pillar that I'd like to talk about and share with you mostly is the 3rd pillar here around internal complexities that emerge in large organizations. But let's not forget, around that market disruption, there are fickle customers with unarticulated needs. There are new entrants into the market. New entrants are backed by venture capital, cheap money to be able to test and learn really quickly. And that's a different investment model to the more incumbent model, which has been around for many years. There's increased uncertainty. The pandemic has shown that black swan events can happen. There's increased every single day. There seems to be a headline of some leaking of personal data from some security vulnerability. But today, what I'd like to focus on is around this internal complexities for many incumbent large organizations. And as we may know, lots of organizations become highly efficient at what they do, and they have a natural tendency towards Taylorism, where we have particular specialists, particular silos doing a particular type of work, which is part of some kind of long value chain. And that may be successful for the existing products and services and offerings to the market, but that's becoming less and less relevant because of fickle customers and new business models, new startups, and so forth. And also another internal complexity is that as humans, as people, and perhaps as teams, we tend to consolidate around what we've learned in the past, what we've found successful in the past, and that we may have less opportunities or have less appetite for learning. And that learning anxiety also needs to be balanced with the survival anxiety. We're going to unpick this a little bit later on in the talk. Okay, so that's some background on the sources of pressure. So why is there this internal complexity? What are the realities in large organizations? So I've picked out a few of these. I've picked out 3. One is pattern entrainment. The other is this dynamic of operationalism versus entrepreneurialism. And the other is around this belief that the problem is around alignment. So I'm going to dive into each of these 3. Before I continue, I just want to pause there, just in case there's any questions, any thoughts, or any technical issues that need to be resolved. So I'm just going to pause there for 10 seconds. Okay, everything seems to be okay, so I'm going to continue. So the first thing we're going to look at is around pattern entrainment. So pattern entrainment is a term that I got introduced to by Dave Snowden, and many of us may know Dave Snowden as someone who has conceived and made popular the Cynefin sense-making framework. And he has this story, again, I've got the reference to this story at the end of this slide deck, of black cab operators in London who they have the knowledge where they need to demonstrate they know, without looking at a map, without looking at a GPS, they've got to know every single street within central London and know how to navigate, how to pathfind from A to B, and they're tested. And that's part of what's called the knowledge. There are some black cab drivers who passed the knowledge before a particular part of London was developed. And that particular part of development of London which got developed was the Canary Wharf district, which is a new business district which has been developing for the past 20, 25 years. And what's extraordinary is that those black cab drivers who acquired that knowledge before the development, the new street plan, the new layout of this particular part of London, they have found it more difficult than regular people to unlearn the old layout of Canary Wharf and relearn the new layout and pathfinding for this new Canary Wharf area. what's happened is they have become pattern entrained based on previous knowledge, and they find it particularly hard to unlearn and to relearn the new layouts. And neurologically, what's happened is that we reshape our brain when we learn. We physically change the shape of our brain. And what studies have shown for these individuals is that the hippocampus has actually grown larger in a particular shape. So for us to unlearn and relearn is not just an emotional, psychological, or social thing. We actually need to retrain our neurological pathways. So that's a reality also, not only for black cab operators or drivers, it's also true for individuals within large organizations. They may have found success yesterday, but that success, that way of working may not be relevant for today and tomorrow. And I would add that individuals like organizations, we like to conserve energy. We like to find ways of working, successes, and we consolidate around that. We become calcified around that. We become efficient. We add operations, we add process, we add ways of working around that. And if that becomes less and less relevant, it's very, very difficult to unlearn and to relearn new successful patterns. So that's pattern entrainment. Now I'd like to talk about operationalism versus entrepreneurialism. So the entrepreneurial system is one which all organizations started off with. If an organization has been around 100 years, the first few years they were highly entrepreneurial. That's characterized by complexity, uncertainty, rapid change, emphasizes innovation, so learning through failure, being able to pivot, to persevere, to pull the plug on initiatives or ways of working or offerings to the market which are no longer relevant. It's very exploratory, it's very innovative. As the organization ages, they find successful patterns and they become more and more operational, which is characterized by things which are predictable, things which are known, things which aren't novel. And the way in which the things we emphasize in these areas, we look at cash in till, we look at revenue, we look at profit, we look at continuous improvement, we look at operational excellence. So we're looking at the two sides of the organization here. Sometimes it's called the Ambidextrous Organization. So the things that on the entrepreneurial side, the things that we measure are quite hard to measure. We have a look at customer behavior, stakeholder behavior changes. We need to structure ourselves for end-to-end collaboration. We need to create cross-functional teams, all the good things that we know as people in the Agile space. Also, we need to look at intrinsic motivation. So things such as made popular by Daniel Pink, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. How we measure success on the entrepreneurial side is around the things that tend to be easier to measure. It could be on cost reduction, it could be revenue growth, it could be work which can be divided up into different silos, but each silo has their specialisms. And it tends to be, people have a greater tendency to be motivated by extrinsic motivation. The challenge is for many large organizations is the entrepreneurial system can stifle the emergence of this kind of nascent, this kind of quite fragile entrepreneurial system. So that's one of the realities for large organizations. Okay, moving on to the last impediment around alignment may not be the problem. So this is a study from a Harvard Business Review where they surveyed 800 managers and 250 companies about strategy execution. And what they found, there was a myth that execution equals alignment. The more we align, the more we can execute on our strategy. And what these organizations do is they translate strategy and they cascade that down to the different business units and then the different divisions and so forth. And there's a belief that to improve execution, that's done by having tighter and tighter management by objectives, like managing from a distance, managing through via proxies of reports and RAG statuses and so forth. And any failure in execution, it's believed that's a breakdown in alignment. And what happens is there's an alignment trap. So there's ever increasing performance metrics. We have more meetings, we have more steering committees, we have more reports, more control is put in place because there's a belief that execution of a strategy is achieved through more and more alignment, and that's a myth. And that's a myth because, as this report says, is that when an individual is asked how much can they rely upon their boss or their direct report, so this is vertically in their organization, within their business unit, there's actually quite a high level of reliability. It's in the 80% here. So they're already well aligned vertically within their business unit. However, asking the same question about how much can a colleague rely upon somebody in a different business unit or a different department, that percentage goes down to less than 60%, not much more than how much they can rely upon an external supplier, a third-party partner. So this indicates that the reality is that it's not around alignment to be able to deliver an execution, deliver some innovation or some strategy. So again, I posed the question, how can our clients create the ability to rapidly respond to change? So I'm going to move on to moving from those obstacles to outcomes and approaches for closing the entrepreneurial gap, that gap between the dominant operational system and the entrepreneurial system. Before I do so, I'm just going to pause there again in case there's any questions or thoughts. Ioana, perhaps you can just check to see if there's any questions or thoughts in the chat.
I can't see any for now, but I'll let you know if there are any.
Cool, thank you, thank you. So let's move on. So we spoke about some of the realities, some of the problems. I'd like to identify 3 ways in which we can overcome this gap between operators and entrepreneurs. The first one I'd like to look at is handpicking the entrepreneurs. So we've got to identify individuals who have an ability to recognize a dynamic between learning anxiety and survival anxiety. And this is some work put together by a fairly world-renowned psychologist, Edgar Schein. And this is quite similar to other things that people may have on their mind of theory X, theory Y individuals. And what Edgar Schein says around learning anxiety is that, and the survival anxiety is that we've got to be very careful to describe organizations as burning platforms, because that increases the survival anxiety. That makes people worried, that neurologically that makes us defensive, and it puts us in a place of fear and reduces our focus, our ability to have a wide degree of options. And that creates a strong resistance to learning. So what we shouldn't do as leaders is actually increase the survival anxiety. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't say the end is nigh, it's a burning platform, we've got to change. Instead, what we've got to do as leaders is be able to reduce learning anxiety by doing some of the following. So conveying the business realities of where the organization is now, giving people a clarity of mission, saying this is what good looks like. We need to be able to provide people the right competency, the right skills, the right freedom, the right leadership support, the right coaching support, the right training. And what this allows individuals to do is to reduce the learning anxiety. And that's quite often backed up by leaders going first. So this is a dynamic which can help us identify entrepreneurs who have a willingness to learn and adapt and experiment and learn and take on some of the agile principles that we're familiar with. Something else worth considering tying into this is the work of David Marquette of Turn the Ship Around. And what he says is that rather than, if we have a look at the organizational structure, we have the teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization. We have and we have the information. And at the top of the organization, we have leaders at the apex of the organization who hold authority, hold decision-making power. What we need to do is be able to push down freedom and decision-making power down to the individuals and teams at the bottom of the organization. And that reduces the learning cycle, the feedback cycle, the ability to take something to market, a new piece of innovation to market, to test and learn whether we're right or wrong. And the way in which we do that is to understand and make use of this dynamic, is that the more we can give the entrepreneurs that we've hand selected who can operate with this approach, the more we give as entrepreneurs the clarity of what we're trying to achieve and the technical competencies to achieve it, the more we can give them control over making their own decisions, the more we can operate in this space up here, the less we need to push information up to authority and wait weeks for someone at the apex of the organization to pass a decision back down again. And what we need to do is to handpick those entrepreneurs who have that mindset to learn and grow, who can deal with things which are rare, to learn through failure, be comfortable with ambiguity. So these are some of the characteristics that we've got to do in large organizations when we hand select, we cherry pick individuals across the organization to form the entrepreneurial system. Something else we should recognize is organizing ourselves for innovation. So actually, before I move on, let me describe what I'm about to do, and this is an opportunity for people in the chat area to put a few comments. So I'm going to pose a few questions, so feel free to use the chat area to respond to some of these questions. And what I'm going to do is present 4 different business models or 4 different organizational design models. And off the back of those, I'd like people to estimate the percentage of companies with those models who are able to do breakthrough innovation. So let me explain further by revealing the first 2. And this is also from another Harvard Business Review study, which looked at 35 attempts at breakthrough innovation in 9 different industries. So the first organizational design where they're trying to create breakthrough innovation is where there is a management structure and different business units. So here's manufacturing, it's sales, and R&D. And what they were trying to do is to integrate innovation within the existing operational functions. So this is one of 4 business models. And then the second business model is one where they had cross-functional teams. So they had innovations operating within the existing organization. So within, in this example here, manufacturing, sales, R&D, but outside the existing management hierarchy. So management wasn't really involved. They were doing this at a distance. So my question to you guys for these first 2 organizational design models, of those that had this organizational design, what percentage of these companies do you think were able to do breakthrough innovations? And the same again for this organizational design, which percentage of these companies were able to achieve breakthrough innovation? So if you like, I invite you to put in some percentages into the chat. So I'm not seeing the chat at the moment, Ivana. Just if you could let me know if people are responding in the chat.
We don't have any, so I suggest you can just put 2 numbers. One would be for the model which is on the left-hand side that you can see on your screen, and the second percentage is for the other model which is on the right-hand side. Okay, so we've got some. So 70% on the right, more comparing to the left, and 70% emerging business, 10% for functional design, so 5% for, again, the left one, and 10% for the model which is on the right-hand side. Then we've got a 0 for the first one and 50% for the second one, 15% for the left one, and 35% for the emerging one. I like the emerging business more. And again, we have 20% for the first one and 50% for the emerging. And the other one is 40% and 80%. Wow.
Wow, fantastic. A good range there, but there seems to be a trend which is correct that, well, let's actually see. Let's reveal the percentage figures. So for the one which was a functional design, so they had existing operational teams who were trying to innovate as well, of those surveyed with this organizational design model, 25% were successful breakthrough innovations. Okay, so the next one, which was cross-functional teams. So these were existing teams who were trying to do breakthrough innovations, but they weren't outside of the existing management hierarchy. 0% were successful. So I'd like to present a third one. So this one here is unsupported teams. So these were innovation teams who were outside the existing established organization, so outside of these existing operational teams here, and also outside of the management structure. So they were really on their own. They were emergent business, totally on, well, I won't say totally, but very much on their own. So again, in the chat, have a guess at the percentage of companies that had this organization design model. What percentage were able to achieve breakthrough innovation?
Okay. We have 50%, over 50%, 0, 5%, 40%. Hannah says, I thought that was the right hand was before. I'll go for 40%.
Oh, the right hand one was so that there's innovation which is integrated into the existing operational units, but they're outside of the existing management structure. So this one here is where, if I go back to this one, where they're totally on their own. They're not even integrated into the existing operators. So it seems like for those who responded so far, it's 50% or less. So let's see. Oh, by the way, this study and these results, I'm going to put a reference to these at the end of the talk. So feel free to have a look for yourselves. So here, 0% of those organizations with this organizational design model were successful at breakthrough innovations. Yeah. When I saw these, first of all, I was quite surprised at how low they were. So the final one. So this is the Ambidextrous Organization. Very much what I've been describing so far in this talk is that here we have our existing business with the existing different business units reporting to management, but separate from the existing business, we have an emergent business who are able to come up with their own processes, their own structure, their own culture, but they were integrated and supported by the management, the existing management hierarchy. So, final question to be answered in the chat. What percentage of organizations with this design model were successful at breakthrough innovations?
Dean, can we please ask a question?
Yep.
So we have a question from John. Feel free also to unmute yourself, or I can read it for you. So the question is, how are you defining breakthrough innovations?
So the report defines breakthrough innovations as something which is actually quite novel. It's not a continuous improvement on their existing products and services. So this is actually something they've never tried before, and they found success in the market, some degree of success in the market.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right. In terms of percentage, we have 60%, 90 plus, 90, 60.
Okay, the person that said 90 plus is correct. It was 90% of organizations structured with this organizational design was successful. And I have to say, this is also my experience as well. When I've helped create entrepreneurial transformation units, we've created it so that we have one transformation director appointed by the CEO, and that transformation director created that innovation unit, which was quite separate to the existing business, to the existing operators. And we were quite successful with creating breakthrough innovations. Any thoughts or questions on that?
There are two questions actually. So I'm going to read the first one. Or if Adam would like to ask.
Yeah, I was just asking. I've had two. Sorry, you're asking me?
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they sound quite similar. They look a bit similar on the screen, so it's hard to tell which one is like which. So like this one sounds a bit like the first one to me, the one which had moderate success. Yeah. But one of the differences might be the size. So like, are you controlling for the size? Because the last one looks massive, whereas the first two look pretty small. So like, obviously if you have a lot more money, then that's also going to be more chance of success, you know. That's my question.
Yeah, no, you're right to raise that question. And the survey has looked at 35 attempts across 15 business units in 9 different industries. So with that wide range of study areas, that we could perhaps assume that they averaged out for those different variables that you rightly called out. Did you have another question?
No, well, that was the same question really. The two questions were the similarity between them, and you've gone back to that slide. I can see how it's different.
That's right. They are different in that because they've got the existing teams who are running existing operations, and this design model is that they're also trying to do innovation. It's hard to do BAU and innovation at the same time, I guess, is one challenge. Whereas with this one here, they're actually quite separate. This could, put crudely, this could be BAU, this could be innovation.
Yeah. Thanks.
But that raises the question of how we cannot have this existing system with the two sides of the Ambidextrous organization have got to be able to collaborate and work together.
So, Dean, I have a question.
Please.
I don't know if you remember me at all, but I know you worked at the we crossed paths at the Telegraph. The authoring system, would you say that was set up as an emerging business separate from everything else? Because it didn't have to do so I ran the Scenic platform, and the other kind of system was, a whole new world really. So which of these models would you say that fitted into?
Yeah, good to see you again, Hannah. I think that, so if I remember correctly, this was a new content management system for journalists, also a new platform for a new front end for readers and advertisers.
It was a new technology. It was a new workflow for the editors. It was, I think, new working practices as well for the actual design teams. I think, pretty much everything about it was new, apart from the actual content, which was the one thing that kind of remains similar.
It's a good question. I suspect it was, to a degree, the Ambidextrous Organization, because they had the existing, they had the existing publishing system, the existing cultures and structures and ways of working, but at the same time, there were new teams building something on a new platform, and they had selected journalists where they were testing and learning really, really quickly.
Yeah, that's really useful then, because that gives me a real life example to kind of map to that.
Please.
I actually have a question. So I was assuming that the third model that you put, that the emerging business, since it's actually separate out, that they have their, since it's not actually managed, that they have the different functions that are there to support them. And it looks like it's different from the fourth one. Like, how is that different from the fourth one? Even though, I mean, obviously the third one is not spelled out. So what was the third one supposed to be?
So sorry, is the question around the different structures for the entrepreneurial business?
Yes. So the one right before this one.
Mm-hmm. This one.
That's right. I was assuming that the under the emerging business, inside the emerging business has the necessary functions that actually help the emerging business, since they are outside of the established organizations. But obviously, now that I saw the fourth one, it is not the case. So what exactly is this one? Like, what would this one?
Yeah, a fantastic question. And that actually brings us on to the next bit here. I think what the challenge with this model is that the entrepreneurial system, even if they find things which are proven, perhaps through MVP, that it's going to be successful, they then need the support of the operators. Entrepreneurs need to work with operators at some early stage to be able to scale it and make it operational to sustain that breakthrough innovation. So if you think about the mantra of build it, nail it, scale it, perhaps they can build it and nail it, but they cannot scale it because they're not connected to the entrepreneurial, to the operational system.
Ah, I see. All right.
And Moon, I think this is a fantastic juncture to move on to the third bit of closing the gap between entrepreneurs and operators. So let's move on. Okay, so yes, so how do we actually integrate the operational system and the entrepreneurial system? A great challenge because there's always a gap. So before I do so, I'd like to talk about the existing, how can I put it? The existing focus of some businesses, particularly promoted by the HR department. And they have a particular focus at the moment around human capital. And that can be typified by things like leadership competency models, leadership development, employment engagement, talent management, talent development, and performance management, and so forth. This is right, and it should continue. There should be a focus on human capital. But there's an emergent field of social capital. So this is the natural networks which emerge and the natural relationships that may emerge informally, which is totally different to the formal hierarchical illustration of how we do organizational design. So the human capital approach is correct, but we also need to start considering the social capital, and that's what I'm going to be examining now. So this is the work of the academic Mary Albeen. Again, I've got references at the end of this presentation, so you guys can go deeper. So what she describes here is that it's absolutely natural for humans, from a sociological point of view, to create highly coherent structures, highly coherent groups. If you think about Dunbar's number of we can only form close relationships with up to 150 people. And by the way, that includes people in our professional lives and also our personal lives as well. So if we think about our professional lives, that number is going to be somewhat less than 150. So highly coherent clusters or groups. So these are individuals who are connected to that group. It talks about within this group there could be many redundant connections. There's good cross-fertilization of ideas and development there. Information could be shared quickly. There's a high level of trust. But think about how this maps to the entrepreneurial system and how that maps to the operational system. It's absolutely natural for humans to perhaps have the potential of suffering from an us and them dynamic. But let's have a look at social capital. So social capital recognizes that quite naturally there are going to be individuals who can act as bridges between these highly coherent structures. Let's suppose this is the entrepreneurial system and this is the operational system. There are individuals that we need to identify and support who can bring these two separate coherent clusters together and get them to talk, get them to challenge each other, get them to create, get them to learn through frank discussion. So we need to identify those people who have what's called brokerage. They can broker connections, create connections between quite disparate, coherent, separate, isolated clusters. So this is something that I believe that we can examine. I think there's something, these things are already available. We've just got to make use of them and support these people who have strong social capital. Something else that Mary Albin talks about is taking an ordered approach to how operators and entrepreneurs can work together. But what happens is that operators have their own challenges, their own pressures. Remember what I mentioned before is that they want to increase operational excellence. They want to maintain or increase revenue. They want to continuously improve their existing systems and operations, their existing products and services. Whereas the pressures on the entrepreneurs are actually quite different. They want to innovate. They want to learn through failure. They want to get something to market. They want to close down that feedback loop. They're not looking for revenue. They're not looking for profit. They're not looking for operational excellence. That's far too soon to do that. But what happens is tension is created because the operational system is very, very dominant and overbearing. So this is something that Mary Albin recognizes. But that's an ordered approach to how we may want to support entrepreneurs. What more Mary Albin talks about is actually using that tension, using that discussion, using that strong debate from the two different areas, the two different systems, for emergence to occur. And there's some practices and principles that she recommends to support that. What this does, this looks at future viability. So if we put on our design thinking hat on for a moment, so together the entrepreneurs and operators can test and learn rapidly. Is this idea desirable? Do our customers like it? And for entrepreneurs to do that, they need to work with the operators because they've got access to these users, they've got access to these markets, to these demographics, to these personas. We also need to know whether this is viable. Is this got strategic alignment? Is this got strategic fit? Can we actually make a profit or get good revenue out of it? Also, is this feasible? Can we build it? Can we nail it? Can we scale it? And this is where both the entrepreneurs and operators have got to come together in what Mary Albin talks about the adaptive space. So what happens is emergence, new products and services comes from the entrepreneurs, and we need to get it across to the operational system so we can scale it and maintain it. And that happens in the adaptive space. So what happens in that adaptive space? So before moving on to that, I'd like to touch on a couple of points. Is that, to me at least, this shows that innovation isn't necessarily about technology. It's not so much about the technology stack. It's not about processes and tools. Innovation is much a social phenomenon as a technical one. If you think about that social capital. And also, innovators, entrepreneurs, to scale it, they must work with those operators to gain influence and momentum. So some of the practices and principles that Mary Albin suggests in the adaptive space for those operators and entrepreneurs to work together. So one thing is liberating structures. Some of us on the call may be familiar with liberating structures. This is a group facilitation, a collection or a catalogue of group facilitation techniques which allows people to express their views and ideas in a space which is highly structured but highly open to generating ideas, diverse ideas from a large group of people. So if you have operators and entrepreneurs in this space using liberating structures, that can be a practice which is beneficial. A principle is embracing conflict. Many cultures, many organizations, many individuals fear conflict, but we need to create the psychological safety. We can describe it as psychological safety, where it's okay for dissenting voices to say something, saying, I disagree. And as a leader, we can do things to create that space for saying, no, I don't think this is right for these reasons. And as a leader, we can do stuff like throw a soft curveball, saying like, I think we should douse ourselves give our customers the most ridiculous product or service possible, and that just creates a safe space for people to dissent, saying, leader, this is wrong for these reasons, stuff like that. So intentionally kind of create the environment where there can be dissent, there can be counter argument, where there can be counterpoints. So that's a principle. Another principle is to think big, start small, learn fast. So that's another principle. And then finally, find a friend. So if you're in the entrepreneurial space and you're trying to nail it and scale it, you may have a contact, perhaps through the person of high social capital who already knows someone in the entrepreneurial and the operational space, to actually share that idea and see if there is some space to be able to test and learn, to be able to scale it to further out into the organization. So I'd like to give you a real life example of how this was achieved for a previous client of mine. I've worked for a number of different retailers, and one particular retailer had a challenge with their customer service operation. And a lot of people at the front of the store, a lot of colleagues at the front of the store were trapped behind the customer service desk. And we wanted to improve the customer service. And what we did is the entrepreneurial team had this idea of, what if we coach and support the customer service colleague and close down that customer service desk? We knew that from an operational point of view, this would be very, very difficult to do. But what the entrepreneurial team did was find a friend on the operational side. And that friend was a regional manager who identified the benefits of this idea. And that area manager then found 3 store managers who he knew would be quite open to this idea. And so together, those operators, those store managers, worked with the entrepreneurial team to test and learn how we could encourage customer service colleagues to try out different practices, and rather than being trapped behind that customer service desk. So you can see here that we are working for innovators and early adopters on the entrepreneurial side before scaling it to the early or late majority. So just in conclusion, because we've got 3 minutes left. So how can organizations create the ability to rapidly respond to change? I've repeated that question. So I believe they can do that by recognizing the realities and pressures and then using techniques to close the entrepreneurial gap. So we know the problem that we have, the realities we have, is around pattern entrainment, the divide or the gap between operators and entrepreneurs, and that belief that we can increase strategic success and breakthrough innovation just through more and more alignment. Alignment quite often isn't the problem. And things that we can try is handpicking our entrepreneurs, finding those people who are comfortable with ambiguity, who have that learning mindset, who have that perhaps that theory why mindset, ways of organizing ourselves for innovation, so structuring the entrepreneurial unit separate from the operational unit, but still reporting up to management. And as I've just covered, we need to find ways of eventually bridging that gap to nail it, to build it, nail it, and scale it with those operators. I've got some references and some acknowledgements I'd like to share. Before opening up for any questions or any thoughts, I'd just like to say thank you for coming along this evening, and thank you, Ivana, for giving me this platform once again. It's been a real pleasure to speak to people across the world, and you can get hold of the slides if you hit this URL as well. So I'd like to say thank you, and in the last couple of minutes, see if there's any questions or anything that we need to close on.
Great. Thank you, Dean, for your talk. If I can have a round of applause, it was an amazing talk. So thank you also for accepting the invitation to talk at this. Feel free also to drop any questions to the channel. And I know that there is one that we have actually missed previously. The question is, if you remember, Dean, we were talking about the organizational structures. I do have a question from Wasim, if you would like to ask it, if you're still on the call. So the question was about the structure number 2. If you have any insights on why this particular structure did not work at all, which was the standalone startup-like setup.
Yeah, this one here, I think this is the second one here. So this one is where the existing organizations, so these existing operators, were attempting breakthrough innovations, but outside of the existing management hierarchy. So there was no management support. So we need management. We need management to give access to funding, to help with appointing the right skills, develop the right kind of talent, to be able to recognize with the leaders, know where to emphasize and where to put focus on what work we should and shouldn't do. Without that management support, it's going to be very hard for the existing business to innovate and find those breakthrough innovations. That's my reading of that situation, why that was unsuccessful.
Fantastic. I hope this answered the question. Do we have any other questions or comments? I can see there is a really positive feedback. For example, the talk was very mind-provoking, and get the Agilist newsletter. So let's make sure we sign up if you're interested. I personally, I have a few takeaways. I've learned a lot, and I definitely look up a couple of names and surveys you've mentioned. I think this talk was really interesting. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Hopefully we can host this event again and have you, Dean, back at some point. So if you have any questions, feel free also to use the meetup page. I'm sure Dean can answer those. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.